Hello. We are back yet with another day and another video. Now, as you can tell, I'm in a different space. I'm currently in my bedroom. I have these LEDs behind me, the strip behind my headboard, which looks cool. But then I also have, let's see if you can see it. Oh. You see that? I have those red LEDs back there. And I feel like it would be so cool. Sorry, let me just, oops. I feel like it would be so cool if I could get both the red and the blue in the same shot because I feel like they look so good together. Hold up, my camera's misbehaving. Let's line you up. Okay. Yep. As always, super unedited and super unprepared. Maybe if I flip this and I make the desk blue and the headboard red. No, now it just looks scary. Okay. We're going to go back to the old, good old reliable. Okay, whatever. We're going with a blue background. I also have my softbox setup. This is a really nice setup, okay, for what this is, which is a super unscripted and unprepared video journal. However, I have a book, okay? I haven't written on paper in ages. I feel like I've been saying that a lot because I've had a lot of time to write on paper. If that makes sense? I don't know. Anyways, I have a thing, and I've taken some notes for this one because I was doing my notes on my phone, but I was like, oh my god, this is unscripted, unprepared. So might as well write on paper because that's something I don't do a lot. And I have a pen. Yeah, we're ready. Anyways, today, like I said, we were going to do yesterday, is a continuation of the previous video journal in which we discussed essentially the question of does good require bad? That whole yin yang, right? The balance. Is the balance necessary to achieve true good? Now, before we continue, I think I didn't clarify yesterday, but I'm operating off of a very specific definition of good and bad. I have a very detailed meta-ethical position or meta-ethical framework when it comes to answering what is good and bad. And I spent a lot of time working on it, and it is pretty comprehensive. And I think I haven't made a video covering it, which is a lapse of judgment, but I thought we would do that later. Maybe I have made a video covering my meta-ethical framework. Maybe in a previous video journal. I was checking out the other video journals today, and maybe there's something there. I'm going to upload these shortly, probably this week. But I haven't done one yet. So I thought to myself, this may be a little confusing, right? Because what do you mean by good and what do you mean by bad? Long story short, let's call good whatever leads to my maximum fulfillment. For the sake of this conversation, we can abstract that one layer above and say whatever leads to your maximum fulfillment, because that's part of my framework, but essentially what leads to maximum fulfillment in a human. Let's just call it that. So good, or the maximum good, or true good, would be maximum fulfillment in a person. Fulfillment is kind of hard to point to because I don't believe there's a specific state of fulfillment that's observable in the brain, but it's an emotion that would it be an emotion? I think it's more of a mood. Mood is like long-term emotion. Does that make sense? Let's just say it's a sort of emotional state, sort of mood that I guess you know it when you know it. If you know, you know, right? I think fulfillment is very intuitive. You feel fulfilled. I think it's hard to describe what fulfillment is because at the end of the day, fulfillment is also kind of individualistic. It kind of depends on the person. But there seem to be basic prerequisites or basic building blocks to what we consider fulfillment in a person. For example, if I were to say that I think most people can intuitively separate hedonic pleasure from eudaimonia, or this long-term fulfillment, in the sense that hedonic pleasure is short-term gratification that could potentially not necessarily lead to long-term fulfillment. Where I guess you can kind of imagine long-term fulfillment as a long-term pleasure. Maybe I still have to get that down. And actually, in my meta-ethical framework, I still haven't pinpointed exactly what fulfillment is, because I feel like it's very intuitive, so it doesn't need to really be defined. But I think I'm going to add that as a topic to explore in future. Let me just write that quickly down. Look at that. Huh? Bang. Pen and paper. What the fuck? So to summarize, goodness is whatever maximizes my fulfillment or your fulfillment, just generally fulfillment, and thus logically maximum badness is whatever minimizes fulfillment the most. I'm kind of defining badness in the same sense as coldness is defined, where you don't get coldness. Coldness isn't something you can have more of. You just have less heat, right? Heat is thermal energy, and coldness is just the act or the state of having less of it. So I guess that's what we're defining badness as. You could probably, I wonder what the opposite of fulfillment would be. That's a topic for another day. Essentially, I think that's a caveat that I wanted to preface this conversation with. Now, we left off the previous one with the question, why does true or maximum, assuming that's a thing that you can have, why does true or maximum fulfillment require net negative suffering events? So just to quickly talk about around this point for a little bit, as always, because we love tangents. This point, this idea that true fulfillment requires suffering, is a belief which is different. It's markedly different to this question, because this question specifically refers to requires net negative suffering events. So that's different to what I believe. But I do believe, and I've had a very deep, long-standing belief for quite a bit of time, on suffering being required for fulfillment, to whatever degree. In the previous video journal, I discussed how I have this paradox of heaven, right? Where if heaven is truly this ultimate perfect place where you have maximum goodness, which in my case would be maximum fulfillment, it would inherently be bad because your baseline adjusts, and thus you have permanent neutrality, right? Because of that hedonic adjustment, which I think is a term we used last journal, which actually would not be about fulfillment, because hedonism is about short-term pleasure. But I wonder if you could abstract, or if you could refer to hedonism as long-term pleasure and thus fulfillment, whatever. And I've always taken this belief for granted, that suffering was required for pleasure. But there's this practice that I like to engage in, and that I've been engaging in since 2021, maybe 2020 to 2022, where, I recognize that as people, we have what I call a constellation of beliefs. So each idea that we have forms its own little star. And if that star can have solar system or whatever, where you have like sub-ideas that are derived from that greater idea. But generally, these ideas are stars. For example, goodness is maximum fulfillment or whatever. That's an idea. And that would correspond to a star. Or the idea of fulfillment requiring suffering, that's another star. And our mind constructs these vast, some people less vast, constellations of these stars. And this is something that you can actually observe in media, for example. A great critique I have, great in the sense, not that it's amazing, I'm not schlub in my knob, but in a sense, it's a big critique that I have of some media systems, is that it seems that we have a capacity to inherit these constellations. So it's not like you hear an idea and you say, oh, that's a great idea, and you just throw it into your constellation. It seems more intuitive for humans to adopt entire constellations. It's very rare to pick out certain ideas and add to your constellation. I think that's because this constellation ties into your narrative, and I don't know. I haven't dove deep into this topic enough yet, but it actually would be interesting to see, how this constellation of ideas operates. But again, that's a question for another day. I don't even know how to write that down, so I'm going to let my future Lorenzo come up with that idea. But it seems that these constellation of beliefs become really solid. So we look up at, our metaphorical night sky, and it seems that it doesn't really change day to day, or at least it gets to a point where it crystallizes in such a way where it doesn't go through much change. And the idea of stagnation, to me, or I guess in this case, conservation of the stars, is a little scary. Maybe it's because I believe change to be inevitable, and if your constellation doesn't adapt to that change, it's probably a bad sign, or doesn't undergo through change. It's a bad sign because maybe you're not keeping up. But it's also not meant to change day to day. I mean, if you woke up tomorrow and suddenly the stars were completely different, or maybe you wouldn't notice, but scientists would be freaking out, like, something's wrong. But, as stars move apart, redshift, whatever, everything is moving apart, and as the galaxy changes shape and as things move around in space, the constellation is meant to change, and I think that's healthy. So a practice that I've undergone to ensure that my constellation stays refreshed, some may call it a sort of spring cleaning of the mind, is to pick at these stars and hold them in my hand and think, okay, we're gonna put you on trial. Like, is this a legitimate thought? Let's put this through the ringer. Let's give it the most rigorous test possible, sort of Cartesian test, right? Doubt everything. And let's see if it stands up to that test. And I think it's super critical. I think it's a great heuristic that I've developed, and it's allowed me to stay fresh, open-minded, and adaptable. And I think it's allowed me to grow a lot more intellectually or philosophically than I otherwise would have if I just stayed stagnant. You may not know this, but I'm someone who has undergone major philosophical and political shifts throughout my life. Recently, not so much. I've stayed a little more stable because I was so aggressive with this Cartesian doubting. But Descartes was this French guy who doubted shit, basically. I think, therefore I am. Whatever. It doesn't matter. This is all fake philosophy, okay? The 18-year-old came up with this. 16-year-old came up with this before even thinking about philosophy, okay? So, it's all fake. It's all stupid. But, yeah, I have that belief, right? That's something I should challenge. That I'm very anti-intellectual when it comes to philosophy, whatever. Essentially, this is a way of practicing this spring cleaning. I've forgotten how to be concise during this video journal, which I think is a problem, but I also like talking, so let's try to balance those two out, right? Okay, so we're all caught up. This is a kind of spring cleaning for this idea, and this is an idea that I've held forever. Going back to it, we ended this conversation actually talking to Gemini before I realized how late it was, and we had to go to sleep. Again, I'm talking to Gemini because I don't have someone else that is adept enough in these topics to freely talk to me. And also, I like the adaptability and the ease of using Gemini. So if you don't like AI, I understand. Valid, but it's useful for now. Okay, so the question, just to recap your mind, just to refresh, Gemini gives 4 points to counter our belief that it would be possible to achieve maximum fulfillment without any net negative suffering. The first was a contrast principle in hedonic adaptation, which I've already covered, so I'm not going to really deep dive. Basically, the baseline of joy climbs as joy climbs. We have this tendency to, I was going to say, return to the mean, but I don't think that's the actual definite proper term for this. It's just we have this tendency to return to a baseline. And if we're happy for a long time, our baseline goes up. For example, if you're super poor, your baseline for wealth is at a certain level. And when you reach that baseline, if you're super poor, you're born into poverty, that's your whole life, your standard of living, your average, your quality, your baseline for what you consider the standard of living would be at that point. If you become rich in one day and then go back to poverty, it's not like it's going to snap up and then snap down. But if you're rich for a while, it's going to slowly rise. So much so that if you're rich for a decade and then you go back to that poverty point, it's just going to feel really bad, right? You're going to feel very below that baseline. That's the adaptation of a baseline. And then Gemini raised the second point, which is eudaimonia versus hedonia, where psychologists divide well-being into hedonia versus eudaimonia, which we've discussed already too. And it's saying that Gemini says that you can maximize hedonia through zero negative experiences, but you won't maximize eudaimonia. And then it raises Viktor Frankl, who's this existential psychologist who developed logotherapy after he survived the Holocaust. And he argues that meaning is often derived specifically from how we bear unavoidable suffering. So an event doesn't need to be framed as a positive growth opportunity. To yield meaning, the sheer act of surviving a permanent psychological wound and continuing to live with dignity adds a layer of depth to a person's life that unbroken comfort cannot replicate. So I generally agree with that, but my counter to that naturally would be, and I phrased this the other time, which it might sound a little crazy, but I feel like in that situation, that event would then become a net positive. And I raised the example of him developing logotherapy and being able to impact lots of people's lives and stuff like that, and therefore creating maximum fulfillment. Point number 3 was the expansion of emotional capacity and empathy. Consider a permanent negative like the premature death of a loved one. Most psychologically healthy people will never say, "I'm glad they died because it made me stronger." It remains a permanent tragic negative. It expands your emotional bandwidth, shatters the illusion of invulnerability, connects you to the universal condition of suffering. It develops empathy, whatever. So it gives you these tools, this environment that allows you to create certain structures, which allows you to have maximum fulfillment. And I don't disagree with this point either. But then again, I would reframe that as actually net positive, because in the long run, consequentially, it resulted in your maximum fulfillment. And then we have psychological wholeness versus perfection. This is Carl Jung arguing that you have to integrate the shadow and that wholeness is important, not perfect goodness. Basically the same thing as the other ones, okay? And my response before I ended the journal was to say the following. I feel like an easy counter to all of these points is the fact that in the long run, any bad event would be a net positive because it led to maximum fulfillment. Of course, this is under my metaphysical framework of consequentialism, where goodness is whatever fulfills me, thus maximum goodness would be what gives me maximum fulfillment. We already discussed this at the beginning. I haven't read Gemini's response yet, so I'm going to read it out now. This is a brilliant counter and honestly a classic... skip this, okay. If we're operating strictly within an egoist consequentialist framework where the ultimate good is your own maximum fulfillment, then your logic is airtight. The math is simple. If event A, a horrible tragedy, is a necessary prerequisite for state B, maximum fulfillment, then event A ultimately yields a positive net utility, of course. That's what I was saying. Therefore, in the grand calculus of your life, event A is a net positive, absolutely. However, while this works perfectly in philosophy, human psychology rarely obeys neat mathematical equations. Here's how psychologists and philosophers untangle the friction between your logical framework and the messy reality of human emotion. Number 1, instrumental value versus intrinsic experience. Your consequentialist framework relies on the distinction between the instrumental and intrinsic value. Instrumentally, the negative event becomes a positive because it is a tool that builds your fulfillment. Intrinsically, the experience of the event and the memory of it remains profoundly negative. Okay, that's interesting. So negative, in other words, badness, would in this case be different from philosophical goodness and badness, which I don't know if makes sense, because I derive my philosophical framework from biology, right? Ever since we developed consciousness, reaching a maximized consciousness has been our primary driver. And thus, it is the ultimate goodness, right? We were born with that natural moral compass. Let's take a situation where someone loses their father. And let's say in situation A, this makes them become a drug addict, and they eventually overdose. So probably never reach maximum fulfillment and end up, unfortunately, passing away with that unrealized gain. And then let's take situation B, where they go through the same experience, but because of childhood or previous tool or being equipped previously with tools to overcome that obstacle, which the former wasn't, they managed to get over their father's death. Not get over it, but internalize it, not in a good way, not in a bad way, where they learn, like we were talking about before, they managed to connect with other people on this like deep emotional human suffering level, which they weren't capable of tapping into before. They gain this empathy. Maybe they gain the knowledge to be able to help other people with this, and helping other people overcome their suffering leads them to an even greater fulfillment. Let's say they die later, age 80 or whatever, maximum fulfillment. Due specifically, which wouldn't have been possible, to that parental death. In one case, I feel like that event is way worse than the other. But then that raises a paradox, right? And I think that's ultimately what we try to get at here, where if a bad, let's say 10 bad event, or let's say 50 bad event out of 100, probably be higher actually for a parental, let's say 100, worst thing in your life, okay, let's say 100 bad death or 100 bad event, would it be 100 bad at the end of the drug addict's life and at the end of the motivational speaker's life? Or would that 100 bad event slowly, because you managed to bring so much good out of that bad event, render that bad event less bad? I feel like that's an important question. That's something to think about while we read the rest. Psychologically, humans are entirely capable of holding these two opposing truths at exactly the same time. You can reach a point of maximum fulfillment and recognize logically, I am only disfulfilled because my loved one died 20 years ago. Okay, that's my example. Gemini pre-watching the video journal. Yet emotionally, you will still experience the grief of that loss as an agonizing negative. The logical recognition that it leads to a net positive outcome does not magically transmute the emotion of grief into the emotion of joy. Okay, so I think there's something happening here. We're equating pain and grief with bad, which I think is very intuitive, and for a reason, right? We've developed this moral compass through our emotions and through our feelings, and pain is bad feelings. You want to avoid it because it generally doesn't lead to maximum fulfillment. And I think that would be true before consciousness. However, I think in the advent of consciousness in the human mind, I can't pinpoint when that was, and I don't think it was like one day you have consciousness, another you do. Probably it was, right? It has to be, but I can't like find out where, a heap becomes a mountain. But I think after the advent of that, we've kind of reached a point where pain is actually good sometimes. And honestly, there's this saying, right, and I think I touched upon this in this journal, but I just didn't explicitly say it, where an obstacle is bad only if you aren't equipped with the tools to overcome it. So, for example, the death of that loved one for the drug addict was a bad event because they didn't have the internal capability to overcome that obstacle and manifest a positive outcome from it, right? More positive life. I feel like for the latter example, where that motivational speaker, I say that because I didn't explicitly say, but let's assume he wasn't being a motivational speaker, where that motivational speaker, the death of their parent could actually be a good thing, even though they're full of grief, and paradoxically, if it was a good thing, they wouldn't have gotten the good out of it. That's actually really interesting. Let's sit with that for a moment. Oh, this is a really strange paradox. So let's take situation 3, okay? And let's say it's the same motivational speaker. But this time, after the death of their father, that motivational speaker has less grief. And what was the 100 death for motivational speaker A is actually only 100 bad for motivational speaker A is only 50 bad for motivational speaker B, because they managed to reduce that 50 badness, because in this case, I shouldn't be using badness, because badness specifically refers to grief and pain, which in the long run is actually positive. So it's different from philosophical badness. We're talking more about like short-term hedonic psychological badness, which I believe there has to be a distinction there. I don't have the appropriate words to suffering. No, because suffering could be the opposite of fulfillment, which means it would be philosophically bad. Okay, this is the distinction we're going to make. Philosophically bad, capital B bad. Psychologically bad, grief, pain, short-term suffering, whatever. Lowercase b bad, psychological bad. So instead of it being 100 lowercase b bad, which it was for motivational speaker A, it would be 50 lowercase b bad, because the grief was minimized, the pain was minimized, all that was minimized because that motivational speaker knew that in the long run it would be a positive event, and thus they didn't, I don't want to say they didn't feel it as deeply, but it didn't hit them as deeply. Let me give you a personal example here. It's hard to think of a personal example here. Just off the dome ski. Let's say I lose a pet, okay? No, too close to home, okay? Whiskey's never dying. Let's say this phone, right? Brand new phone, bought it a week ago. Mommy's money, actually. I didn't buy it. Let's not stolen valor there, but I got it for Christmas, okay? No, I got it for my birthday, which is in 7 days. Happy early birthday, Lorenzo. Because I dropped my phone and the bottom half of my phone, OLED screen, went all white. It was like flashing and just destroying my eyes every single night. It was completely awful. I couldn't use my phone, so I had to get a new one, okay? Or get a screen replaced for like 400 pounds. Opportunity. I was gonna update it either way. I was gonna upgrade the phone either way. Whatever. That was a whole calculation that went into that. But I broke my phone. Now, if I knew I wasn't able to afford a new screen or a new phone, that would have been bad. I would have been really sucky balls. That would have been way more sucky balls, because I knew that the potential of an upgrade wasn't there. However, because I knew the upgrade was there, it was bad. I was like, oh, that's kind of annoying, but I'm so grateful that I'm able to upgrade phone, right? I was filled with gratitude, and it honestly actually didn't. I saw my phone and I didn't even really care that much. But it's also because I fostered a sense of gratitude and perspective shifting reality, and I've gone through all this introspection, and I've developed all these systems that have led me to think a certain way, which has prevented that from being that sucky. But in that case, example A, where I didn't have those systems in place, that would have given me 50 lowercase b bad. But in this case, where I did have the systems in place, it only gave me 1 lowercase b bad. So I've actually removed the badness and potentially potentially, if lowercase b bad is required for uppercase G good, I've actually lowered my fulfillment. So there could actually be a paradox in place where you don't want to maximize lowercase b bad suffering, but you don't want to remove it too much. So maybe there could be an argument here for being too good at dealing with negative experiences, if that makes sense. So let me give you another example. I've been kind of suffering from success recently, okay, for a while now. But sure, I've had like minor, maybe kisses or brushes with what could have been in the future depressive episodes, but because I have these systems in place and my mind has been used to this and I introspect a lot, and I built like this almost protective shield around my mind. It's kind of hard to slip into. It's not hard in the sense that, I actually saw TikTok today. I know, scrolling. It's cringe, right? Like a pig. Oh, I love the slop. Feed me the slop. But I watched a TikTok that said, don't stop calling things good or stop calling things hard or easy. Start calling things unfamiliar familiar. That causes like a cognitive shift, and I never thought of that cognitive shift, so I'm going to start practicing it now. But because remember, perspective shifts shift reality. If I haven't made a video journal on that, we will do at a point in the near future. But I forgot what I was talking about. Oh, it's unfamiliar for me to slip into a deep depression anymore. Essentially, my whole issue is that I have become too good at dealing with external pressures. I'm not really affected by the external world in a negative sense anymore. I still feel deeply, I believe. What did Alyssa Liu say? Which, by the way, she read my journal and stole this idea. Actually, literally, probably. Chinese spy or whatever. Oh, it's a bad look now that I'm forgetting it. It is a bad look. You know what? Let's gloss over this point. Essentially, I feel like I still, whenever I just don't get negatively affected by loss anymore, by bad things, because I'm able to practice gratitude and stuff like that. And because of that, I found it so much harder to find actual obstacles. Like walking around what would have been a mountain before is suddenly like a kind of maybe hill, kind of. I can just walk over it. It's not that big of a deal. And that's problematic because that means I have to start creating my own obstacles, right? It's almost as if I have to be like, okay, these hills are easy. Let me travel around the world and find Mount Everest to climb. Right? That's almost what I have to do now. And of course, this Mount Everest to climb is make these video journals once a day. Like these like self-imposed obstacles that I have to overcome to seek any improvement. Because remember, I still do think that obstacles are required to improve. You do need some sort of resistance to improve. It's like the gym, right? You progressive overload. I have to progressive overload my mind, and the gym of life, the natural external gym, has gone a little too easy. So I have to start practicing internal gym. I have to start doing like weighted calisthenics or whatever, or I have to move from calisthenics to actual physical exercise. I'm joking. I have to move to strength training or whatever. But I think that's paradoxical, right? Because I've become so good at minimizing lowercase b bad, it's kind of harder to maximize capital G good, right? That maximize that long-term fulfillment. And that's annoying, and that's an interesting paradox, which I believe should be explored more. But yeah, I think that's what Gemini could have meant in this first point. We're still on the first point. There's like 4 points here, and we're 34 minutes into the recording. This is amazing. But the separation of instrumentality and instrumentally and intrinsically, where the experiences of an event and the memory of it remains profoundly negative intrinsically, is that lowercase b bad. That's psychological bad. Where the negative event becomes a positive because it is a tool that builds your fulfillment, and instrumentally, which I think is a capital G good. It becomes philosophically good because it allows you to reach a maximized experience in the long run. Let's go over to point number 2, post hoc rationalization. What you're describing is essentially the ultimate psychological coping mechanism, copium. Gemini's telling me I'm coping. When faced with unavoidable, unredeemable suffering, the human brain must find a way to integrate it so we don't collapse into despair. Framing a tragedy as a net positive in the long run is a cognitive reframing tool. True, perspective shifts shift reality. Remember that. That's something that's come up a lot. So maybe we should discuss in the near future. Yeah. What am I doing, bruv? I literally got the book out, mate. I'm gonna write that down. Perspective shifts. Shift. Do you know what happened today? Reality. As I was doing my little slop patrol on the short form content, and I was scrolling, I came across maybe a bajillion self-improvement videos, okay? I'm talking like video after video. It's always because I repost it and I save it to my to-do list so I remember later, which maybe it'll help me write something or maybe contribute to the journals. So yeah, I have told the algorithm multiple times that I do like this kind of content, but it's overwhelming. The amount of advice and the amount of like little heuristics that people were giving me, like for example, reframe hard and easy to familiar, unfamiliar, but I was getting bombarded by this kind of content. And dude, it was like overwhelming. It's like, holy buckets. There's only so much a man can take in one session. Pause. Anyways, that's a little tidbit for you to think about in the future. But framing a tragedy is a cognitive reframing tool. It is how your prefrontal cortex, the logical part of your brain, imposes order on the chaotic, painful signals coming from your amygdala, the emotional center. It doesn't mean the event was a negative. It means your brain successfully executed a survival strategy to extract utility from the ashes. No, I disagree. What? The ashes, you're already presupposing the ashes is lowercase b bad. But again, remember, reframing something as positive G, capital G, good, maximum or conducive of maximum fulfillment would naturally, I believe, if you truly believe it, if you're not just like maybe even manifesting it, could actually help a little bit, but it's all cognitive reframing at the end of the day, but it could lead to the lowercase b bad, temporary pain, grief, whatever, below, let's just say pain, makes it simple. Why don't I just call it pain? Why am I saying lowercase b bad? Okay, whatever. That capital G good could reduce that lowercase b bad from a 50 to a 1. So I don't know if you're recovering something from the ashes, but again, that just might be AI flourish. Cutting through a little bit there. 3, the paradox of meaning. There's a massive psychological difference between I'm glad this happened and I found the ultimate meaning in the aftermath of this happening. Take Viktor Frankl again. Under a strict consequentialist lens, you might argue that surviving the concentration camps was a net positive. That's what I'm saying! Don't take that out of context. That's what I said last time, right? That's what I said in the last video journal. Gemini pre-watched the video journal. What the fuck? That's true, yeah, that's what I was arguing, yeah. Argue that surviving concentration camps was a net positive for him because it led directly to his creation of logotherapy, bringing profound fulfillment to his life and helping millions. Bar for bar, what I said. Couldn't have said it better myself. But if you ask Frankl if the Holocaust was net positive, he would vehemently reject this premise. That's because he's wrong? Is telling a Holocaust survivor that they're wrong, that the Holocaust wasn't that bad for them? Okay, is that kosher? I didn't mean it like that. I don't know. The suffering was absolute and entirely negative. Yeah, negative lowercase b bad. The meaning he chose to forge afterward was positive. Okay, you can't separate those two. Psychology separate... Bro, it's like whatever. Psychology separates the catalyst, the tragedy, from the response to fulfillment. Sure, psychology might do that, but I don't think that's reasonable. I don't think you've gained that. I don't think you've proved that is valid. I think you're doing a little move there that I don't know if I necessarily agree with. Nietzsche and Amor Fati. Before I read whatever's coming, just from that title, I don't remember when I put in my journal, but my journal, the main quote of the journal, of my journal, Who is Lorenzo, that's over 1,000 pages long. You can buy it on Amazon. I'm joking. It's on Google Docs. Is Amor Fati. That's the main quote that I write somewhere in the journal that I say the whole journal's about. And Amor Fati directly translates to love of fate. I say directly translates to because I wanted to use the word directly there. I don't know if it is a direct translation, but it means love of fate in Latin, I believe, or in Greek, same thing. My Italian side is kicking me in the nuts, as goes, but Amor Fati means love of fate, which is that no matter what happens to you, you love it. Pause. I don't mean that way, no diddy, but in the sense that I don't know whether it's because of you yourself or as like I don't know if it's because you love yourself, so whatever happened to you led to yourself and thus it was good, or because you ought to do it to minimize suffering in kind of like a stoic sense. Not to minimize, yeah, in like kind of a stoic sense. I'm not the biggest fan of stoicism. I mean, the Greek alternative history fiction book that I'm working on right now is a critique of stoicism, but I do have a natural propensity to be a stoic, which is something that I have to fight in my day-to-day life, which is ironic because I think most people fight to become more stoic, but I try to fight less to be stoic because I think there's a paradox there too. If you love your fate no matter what compels you to change, right? If no matter what happens, I'm happy, I love it, then what's the point of me doing anything, right? I think there's something to be discussed here. And another topic. Critique for a future journal. Critique of stoicism. Balls in my mouth, balls in my mouth, balls in my... Okay. But yes, and that's Amor Fati, whatever. I think I talked about that enough. And Nietzsche, I don't believe I've read a single philosophy book. Ever. No, the most I've done is capitalist realism. But I don't know if you consider that philosophy book, and that was while I was a Marxist, so it was a little cringe. No. Oh, whatever. But people say I'm most similar to Nietzsche. If they had to pick one philosopher to associate me with, it would be Nietzsche. And when I see people say is every AI chatbot that I talk to about philosophy. Okay, so I don't know. I don't have that many real people that are highly educated in most philosophers to discuss this with. So ChatGPT and Gemini. I haven't asked Claude yet, but ChatGPT and Gemini both say I'm most similar to Nietzsche. Which I don't care for because I have this kind of like anti-intellectual habit when it comes to when it comes to just any philosophy. But your argument actually aligns perfectly with the concept from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. That was awful. But called Amor Fati, a love of one's fate. I just say love of fate. But Nietzsche argued that to achieve ultimate greatness and fulfillment, a person must not just endure the terrible things that happen to them, but actively love them. True! I'm a big proponent of that. Why? Because of but that's not what love of fate... Oh, that is what love of fate is. Is that a Stoic tradition then? Why? Nietzsche was against the Stoics, I believe. Why? Because of exactly what you said. Every single horrific event, every mistake, and every tragedy is an inextricable link in the causal chain that created the current fulfilled version of you. Absolutely true. If you love who you are now, you must logically love the tragedies that forged you, making them net positives. Completely, totally, utterly agree. Besides that one paradox that I discussed earlier, which is that if you love your fate, suddenly the tragedies that happen to you aren't tragedies anymore. And that causes problems because of that hedonic baseline adjustment. Maybe that plays into it. We have to think about that later. You've essentially hit on the exact point where moral philosophy, existentialism, and psychology collide. Logically, you're right. Emotionally and neurobiologically, the human brain still registers the burn of the fire, even if you're deeply grateful for the sword that was forged in it. Would you like to explore it? Nope. Okay, I think that's enough. I think we've done a comprehensive review of this entire topic. Yes, we've left a lot of loose ends, but I believe these loose ends will be discussed at later points. I think what I must do now is get a transcript of this and see if I can pull more video journal topics and see if I can pull any more loose ends from this. Namely, what is fulfillment? And maybe we should explore the paradox of Amor Fati. Maybe we can call it that. I'll add that. Paradox of Amor Fati. That's not a thing in my brain. That's the first time I've ever uttered those words. So just one thing I want to point out, do not judge my handwriting, okay? As I say, I'm not a big handwriter. But do you see these squares? Do you see how they're getting progressively bigger? I did not intend for that. I don't know why that's happening. But anyways, I think that concludes this video journal. I'm going to keep it a stack with you. Before I started recording this video journal, I was kind of apprehensive. I was like, oof, kind of don't want to do this. But did I have any more feelings about this? What if I just make a quick one? What if I do this one tomorrow? And now I'm feeling extremely grateful for doing this. Tying it back to this conversation, this was a little obstacle my brain created that was on the ground, and I was like, you know what? Time to jump over it, and I feel capital G happy, capital G good because of this. This is marketably improved my fulfillment, at least right now. So I'm happy. Maybe I'm just feeling pleasure, and maybe fulfillment has happened later, but I'm happy that I did this. If you were listening, which you probably aren't, I hope you were happy too. Let's not do that. Manifest? No, because that's not a goal, so it doesn't matter. I don't want to manifest views for this because that's not a goal. I don't care if anybody watches. I'm doing this to get the reps in, and anybody watching this is a pure, happy little accident, as Bob Ross would say. Anyways, we're donezos. I need to find a way to close this book because this annoying thing of this book is like it's like an open thing. All books are just open things. So maybe I just don't do it, or I don't know. But so I think I have to use a string and wrap it around it. Anyways, I've used up enough of your time and my time. I'm going to pack my bag. It is 9:30. Oh, my girlfriend's going to be kind of mad at me because I'm a little late, but let's go watch some Game of Thrones. We need to finish season 8 and catch on the flip side. Bye. Oh, by the way, same shirt. I know. I got a yucky and gross on it. Didn't go to the gym today, which is stupid of me. But tomorrow, I just need to get the food in order. I need to get food for breakfast. Because if I don't have energy, I really don't want to go to the gym. But that's not an excuse, man. So you should still go for you, even if you're tired. A bad workout is better than no workout. Michael Phelps said or some shit like that. Don't swear. I think that was the first swear word I've said this entire video journal. Anyways, we're up to 48 minutes now. This is almost a 50-minute video journal. Holy buckets. That's got to be a record. Anyways, peace.